This is the KBDFans Odin V2 and it's the first high-end keyboard in my collection. I definitely got a feel for how good these high-end metal chassis keyboards were going to be from the likes of the Keychron Q1, from the KBDFans TOFU 84, from the TOFU 65, but it's not until I got my hands on the Odin V2 that I realised how much better these high-end keyboards are. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with those keyboards that I mentioned just now, in fact they're all great, but you expect a high-end keyboard to be much better because of how much money you're spending, and in this case it really is. There's no doubt that you end up spending big money on a high-end build, because if you're going to spend $400 or $500 on a keyboard, then it stands to reason that you're also going to buy some of the optional extras like the PVD laser brass weight, like the PVD laser badge. They all come at an extra cost, and then of course you're going to stick yourself a nice set of switches on there, a premium set of keycaps. If you've got a theme going, you're going to stick an Artisan on there, and before long you end up spending a lot of money. But all as I can say is that you get what you pay for, and look at this thing, it's absolutely beautiful. So now that I've gone on about how much this thing costs, let's get down to brass tacks and actually talk about it. The Odin V2 with the standard aluminium weight and the plastic RGB shine through badge will run you $406 in all colourways apart from E-White, which is $428. If you want the PVD brass weight either in gold or laser, that will run you an extra $85. A brass badge, either gold or laser, will run you another $16, and you obviously lose the RGB shine through if you opt for one of those. So with a heavier and nicer looking brass weight and badge, you've added another $101 onto your build. So before you look at switches, stabs and keycaps, you're already $507 in the hole, unless you go for the E-White, which is the more expensive option and will be $529 with these optional extras. On the colours you have 9 colour options, but no options in terms of wireless capability, as it's a wired only keyboard. As I said before, I decided to go big on my build. I went for both the PVD laser weight and badge. For the rest of the build, I went for a heavy set of H1 switches. These weren't cheap either, but suited the dark and manly theme I was going for. It's the Odin V2 for crying out loud, a Norse god. It doesn't get much more manly than these 78-gram switches, which require the use of Thor's hammer to fully actuate. These cost 65 euro cents each, so €6.50 for a pack of 10, so it cost £71.50 to get 110 in packs of 10 to dress this keyboard, and then I had 6 spare left over. I managed to get hold of a couple of sets of Staebies V2 stabilizers a while ago, and this keyboard required over a full set because of the 6 short stabilizers needed for this build, in addition to the 7-unit wire for the spacebar. These are €20 a set, so a little over €20 for this keyboard. Following the theme, I went for the GMK Storm base set. This was another €169, but not on group buy, which was great. Then I topped it off originally with a €120 brass laser Punisher Artisan, but this was just a placeholder for a slightly more budget-friendly €60 THOK Artisan called Titanium Rising Sun. In addition to the above, KBDFans list the full value on all shipments to the EU, meaning I got hit with 21% tax coming into Spain, plus a handling fee, which added a whopping €135 to the keyboard. So the total on this keyboard into Europe was about €1,035. That's about $1,080. Obviously, the reason it costs so much more in the EU than it does in the USA, I imagine, is because of those import taxes and the exchange rate. I've done an experiment now where I've bought from both the KBDFans website on AliExpress. I bought my TOFU 65 from there, and then with this keyboard, the Odin V2, I bought it direct from their website. I can't see an advantage to be gained from either store, the AliExpress store or direct from the website into the EU, because regardless of which you choose, they declare the full amount of the keyboard on the package, so you get hit with that 21% coming into Spain regardless of what, plus the handling fee. It would be really great if KBDFans got a European stockist to stock their high-end keyboards, because while you can buy the likes of the TOFU 65, TOFU 84, TOFU 60, all of the standard TOFU keyboards, you can get them really easy from different stockists around Europe. But with the high-end stuff, there's just nowhere else to go other than AliExpress and KBDFans, making it really difficult to shop from them. So now we'll move on to my build in a bit more detail, and I'll show you the process of me actually building the thing. So you get all the stuff in the box for a really premium build, as you would expect at this price, and I didn't want to do anything other than build the keyboard exactly how KBDFans intended to start off with, because it's a high-end keyboard, it's going to be good building it exactly the way that they intended it to be built. So in the box I got the optional PVD laser badge, the screws and the torque wrench, the optional PVD laser weight, the south facing Hotswappable PCB with RGB LEDs under the badge only, the daughter PCB comes plugged into it, the assembled case with the stock polished aluminium weight, plastic badge and the daughter board housing installed. The polycarbonate plate comes in two parts. The numpad is its own small plate and it's obviously a unique looking plate because it's a leaf spring mount keyboard. You get the case dampening pad, you get the foam sheet for between the switches and the PCB, you get the dampening pad for between the plate and the PCB, and you get the silicone socks which are like the connection point between the plate and the case. The Odin V2 was a build that I really enjoyed. It's a big boy, it's 100% compact layout, so there's a lot of switches and there's a lot of stabilizers to be lubed, so you really just have to settle into it and enjoy the process. I had my switches lubed before the keyboard arrived, so I guess the build took me about 3 hours altogether, not including lubing the switches which I'd already done, but I did in that time have to lube the stabilizers. KBDFans have a really good build guide on their website which I checked out just to see if I needed the stabilizer shims which were included, which I did because I had the 1.2mm PCB. After checking that I just pretty much disregarded it because it's a pretty straightforward build and I wanted to do it in the order that suited me. So first I prepared the case. I stuck the feet on straight out of the box to prevent marking the bottom of the case. I took the case apart by unscrewing the case screws and lifting the top case off. I took out the aluminium weight and replaced it with the PVD laser one. I removed the daughter board housing by unscrewing the 4 screws and leaving it to drop out of the bottom of the case. I installed the daughter board into the housing with the 2 screws provided. The daughter board is just a small PCB with a USB-C port only which connects to the main PCB via a wire. I reinstalled the daughter board housing. Then I removed the stock plastic badge and installed the PVD laser one. Again, both the PVD laser weight and badge are optional extras at an additional cost. Next I prepared and installed the stabilizers. With Staebies you don't need to holy mod or do a bunch of tuning, they just need a good lube job. I just lubed the housings and stems with Krytox 205 grade 0 before inserting the stems into the housings. I checked the wires were straight enough using a phone screen. I lubed the wires with a good coat of Krytox 205 grade 0 to save me syringe lubing them and then assembled the stabs. Once the stabs were ready I placed the PE foam sheet on the PCB, I cut the shims into individual units and placed them on the PCB 2 at a time for installing each stabilizer. You then install the screw-in stabilizers as usual, with the process just being a bit more fiddly with the shims moving around. You could use a small blob of lube to hold these in place, but I didn't do that as I know that I would just make a mess with that, but perhaps it's worth considering as you have to do this 7 times as there's hella stabilizers on this keyboard. Next I started to assemble the plate and PCB. KBDFans don't typically use standoffs, so there are no screws to hold the plate and PCB together. I just placed the PCB foam pad onto the PCB over the stabilizers and placed the plates on top of that. Next I installed the stabilizer switches and did a sound test on all the stabilizers. Once that was good, I installed the rest of the switches. With all the switches on, I installed the silicone socks onto the leaf springs on the plate ready for assembly. The leaf spring mounting system is super easy to install. You just have to make sure you install the silicone socks properly by sliding them on until they bottom out against the plastic. And then when you place the PCB assembly into the bottom case, the silicone socks line up with the corresponding recesses in the case perfectly. So you just plug the PCB into the daughter board, place the PCB assembly in the bottom case, place the top case on top making sure all the gasket rubbers line up, screw the top and bottom cases together using the screws, then install your keycaps. So now let's run through my thoughts on the keyboard. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the only gripe that I've got with the keyboard, which is the lack of full RGB. What I imagine is that the high-end keyboard community don't really want this on their keyboards, but for me, RGB just gives you basically kind of two keyboards to look at almost. In the daytime, you can look at the keyboard as it is in daylight without additional lighting. You can look at your keycaps, you can look at the colorway that you've gone for, all of that really good stuff. And then once nighttime comes, or you darken your office or whatever, then you can switch on the RGB and your keyboard looks like a completely different thing again in the nighttime. So for me, I would just rather see it on there, because you can always switch it off if you don't want it, but without it being on there in the first place, there's obviously nothing you can do about that. So then we go on to the good bits, and there are a lot of good bits. First is just the quality of the parts and the components. It was just, I didn't go looking for flaws and blemishes and stuff with like a magnifying glass, but the thing was just pristine. Everything was just pristine from top to bottom. Everything looked flawless, everything fit together perfectly, and you got everything you needed in the box for a really premium build, or you could obviously get the optional extras and get everything in the box for a really premium build. I really love how my build turned up. I went for a real clean look with the black and greys, which just helped the accent sort of PVD laser parts just pop out of the keyboard even more. The quality of the PVD laser weight and badge is just absolutely out of this world. The brass weight weighs precisely 78 tons, so when you combine it with the keyboard, it may well cause your house to fall down. It doubles up as a keyboard or as a heavy blunt object to take out an intruder in your house. The build was also just really straightforward and fun. It wasn't fiddly at all, with the exception perhaps of the stabilizer shims, which weren't really too bad at all. The only thing you need to keep in mind with this size of keyboard is that it's going to take a lot more work compared to like a 60-65% keyboard. I think when you get into the hobby of custom keyboards, you go straight for the smaller layouts like the 60-65% keyboards, because they're so different from a full-size keyboard, which is what you really used up until then. So going back to a full-size keyboard and modding it might come as a bit of a surprise how much longer it takes. But for me, it's great to have a full-size keyboard or a compact full-size keyboard back on my desk. I know I'm going to use it day in, day out. It's going to be my daily driver for now, at least until I get another premium build keyboard, I think. My other keyboards that I review will obviously get cameos on the desk, and I'll spend a good amount of time using those for my reviews. The function row is super useful for me while I'm working, as is the number pad, so it's just great to have a full-size keyboard back on my desk. Then I guess the main bit is the sound and the feel of the keyboard. In the hand and on the desk, the keyboard is just an absolute lump. It weighs an absolute ton, which makes it feel solid and well made, but it also can trick you into thinking, oh man, this is going to have a really harsh bottom out, like the TOFU 65 without any kind of gasket mounting system. Like, I like those keyboards, but they're not a keyboard that I would choose to use every day. And that's the main difference with the Odin V2. It's got that quality heavy feel in the hand, and it plants itself on the desk just like a house. Like, it feels like it's nailed down to the desk. But then once you start typing, because of that leaf spring mounting system, it's like a really plush and soft typing feel, and it's got a great sound and feel to it out of the box if you build it how they intended you to, with a decent set of switches and stabilizers. And that really is my advice to anyone who buys this keyboard, especially if it's your first high-end build, is I tend to go rogue with all of my keyboards, because with the budget and the entry-level keyboards, you can always do mods and it's always going to improve the keyboards. But with these high-end builds, you just want to build them exactly how they specify that you're supposed to build them, using high-end components, and then by the end of it, you're just going to have an absolutely awesome keyboard sat on your desk. Like I said before, you get what you pay for, and this is by far the best keyboard in my collection. But not only that, it's drawn my attention to the high-end keyboard sort of market, if you like. I'll still be getting hold of the budget, entry-level, intermediate keyboards that I have got in my collection so far, because that's what you guys want to see, and I really enjoy building and reviewing and modding those keyboards. But from now on, I'll always be on the lookout for my next high-end build, and I'd recommend anyone seriously into the hobby like I am to get themselves a high-end build, maybe even the Odin V2, because they really are something to behold, something to experience. They're on another level. You know what I paid for this, because I said at the start, you know how much I love $70 Keychron V-Series keyboards, which means you absolutely know I mean it when I say this keyboard is worth absolutely every single penny.